And here I'm with Conley Owens and my pastor, Peter Copeland. Not related to Kenneth Copeland, uh, just a coincidence. But today we're going to be talking about how is gospel ministry, how is funding for gospel ministry defined, and what is the Dorian principle. I've had a few discussions with some of my online friends about, uh, should gospel ministry books or ministry in general be free? If it is free, how do we go about still funding our local church, our local ministers, our local, teachers that are working and laboring in the work of God? And so I'm with here Conley Owens, who can give himself a little bit of an introduction.
Sure. Yeah, to myself.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Conley Owens. I'm the husband of one wife and the father of 9 kids. I live here in Sunnyvale, California. I'm a software engineer by day, but I am one of the pastors at Silicon Valley Reformed Baptist Church.
And I don't think I've had my pastor on before, but you can introduce yourself once more.
Well, Peter Copeland, and I'm the pastor at Hogan Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida, and been here for about 17 years. I am also the husband of one wife and the father of only 3 kids, so you got me beat there.
You have grandkids?
No grandkids yet.
Okay, maybe you'll catch up that way.
And I'm Josh from Cultivating Christ. I'm the husband of no wife, no kids. But yeah, we're still here. So about when would you say you started with kind of looking for the Dorian principle, and just kind of give us a little bit of background sketch there?
Yeah, so I have a background in open source, which for those who don't know, software, there's human readable code that programmers use, and then it gets compiled down to something the machine uses. Any other discipline in engineering, you're able to reverse engineer something. But in programming, if you try to take that computer code and turn it into human readable code, you end up making a copy in the process and violating copyright law. So it's very different engineering wise than in other disciplines. And so one of the ways that people have dealt with that is by intentionally releasing the human readable code and just doing so for free, and then as a business making their money other ways. So I really got into this in college. This is kind of the main thing that I was working on while I was at Google. I was the guy who would release the Android open source code for a while. I worked on Chromium after that and on open source as a whole at Google. And so these concerns about just how good it is to offer freely certain content and try to make money other ways kind of had me thinking about how it is in the church, how often people just lock down different material that they could be giving freely. And me knowing that, it's not even necessary, even from a business perspective, it's not even necessary to lock it all down, right, in order to make money. I just didn't understand why different ministries would lock down their resources and make them hard to access when it just seemed like they could be just as successful with making them freely available. But I didn't know whether or not this was like a biblical thing. It just seemed like it was my own personal opinion. And so for a long time, I really struggled hard to just, make sure that I'm not binding other people's consciences over something that's not a biblical issue. But after a while, I started to see it in the Bible much more frequently, or not it in the Bible, but rather that the Bible addresses these matters. So the first time I really noticed it, I was reading 3 John, and 3 John 7 and 8 says, they went out for the sake of the name, not accepting anything from among the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers for the truth. So here you have people who should be supported in ministry because they're not taking money from those they are sent. So you have this contrast here between reciprocity, where they'd be exchanging the gospel for money, and that being condemned, and yet supporting, working together for the sake of the gospel and giving money, being commended. And I began noticing this in a lot of other places as well. Finally, the one that I start the book off with, but the one I kind of last found, was Matthew 10. Matthew 10:8-10, where Jesus says, freely you receive, freely give. And then immediately after that says a worker is worthy of his food. So here you have the statement that the disciples should not exchange the message that they're about to proclaim for money, any of the miracles they're going to do, or the message that they're to proclaim for money, but that they are supposed to expect others, and Matthew and Luke use different phrases for this, a son of peace, or one who is worthy, a worthy household. They're to expect these others to support them in this work. So once again, you see this contrast between reciprocity and co-labor. And so that, just noticing that more and more, I wrote my MDiv thesis on this while I was in seminary, and then tried to condense it into something a little more refined for the sake of a book to explain this ethic. So maybe that's a good place to start.
Okay. And you say you said you wrote a book on this, called the Dorian Principle. And did you charge any money for it?
No, no, it's available freely. And on top of that, I went with a publisher called First Love Publishing, that they offer even the print edition for free and the shipping for free as well. So yeah, the book is free in all the senses. I'm not necessarily arguing that print editions of things have to be free. I think there's room for a market for luxury Bibles and things like that. But I don't think that the gospel itself or the message itself should be sold at cost.
Okay. Now you speak in your book, and I'll probably go a little bit jumbled because there's a lot of different topics that I like from your book. You speak of this kind of triangular hierarchy, this triangle of obligation, where I've heard you speak on other times where, the God is the Lord of the harvest, and then the harvesters kind of eat from what God has given them. Can you kind of expound on, how this kind of relates to today in terms of gospel ministry?
Sure. So yeah, God being the Lord of the harvest, that's in the context of both Matthew 10 and Luke 10, which are these passages that talk about a worker being worthy of his food, or a worker being worthy of his wages. And the mistake a lot of people is that they think that, well, if the worker is worthy of his wages, then that means the one who he is ministering to owes him directly something in response. And that seems to be confirmed by these other passages that say that the one who receives should be sharing, the one who is taught should be sharing things with the teacher. And so there is some sense of obligation there. But when you consider the matter in light of the context of Matthew 10 and Luke 10, what's the analogy that's being made there is not one of commerce where something is being sold to another and they're giving it back, right? Rather, the analogy that's being made is one of a worker and an employer. And in that situation, you have workers being sent out into the harvest, and you have an employer who is the one who God in his kindness has obligated himself to supply his workers. And he does that through the harvest, right? Through the field. And you see just tons of these analogies that Paul gives back to back in 1 Corinthians 9, where he's talking about the one who treads the grain, receiving some of it, the one who tends to the vineyard, receiving some of it, the one who, the soldier, receiving funds. Now, if you think about any of this and you consider any of these things to be direct obligations, where it's, for example, the soldier and the king, right? The king is obligated to pay his soldier. If you think of that as a direct obligation, as though the citizen is obligated to pay the soldier rather than the citizen obligated to pay the king, who then pays the soldier, right? There's that triangle. Then what is that in real life? That's extortion. When the soldier goes to the citizen, says, you owe me directly, threatens them to take the money and takes it directly, instead of understanding that it's supposed to go to the king, and then of that, the soldier gets some, right? And this is also even more clear in another analogy that Paul gives in 1 Corinthians 9 with the priesthood. And I'll go ahead and read that passage since it's so important. He says in 1 Corinthians 9:13-14, do you not know that those who are employed in the temple service get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in the sacrificial offerings? In the same way, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. All right, so you have here the statement that New Testament ministry works similarly to Old Testament ministry in the way that it is funded. And how is it that that Old Testament ministry, those priests were funded? Those who serve at the altar share in the sacrificial offerings. You read those passages in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, it's very clear that the Lord is the inheritance of the Levites, and so they are inheriting the Lord, and the Lord is supplying them. It's not the people of Israel being directly obligated, giving their tithes directly to the priest, right? The people of Israel are obligated to God to give their tithes to God, and then He of Himself is giving to the Levites. And so this is something very different than how most people read 1 Corinthians 9, where they say, oh yeah, this gives them the right to charge. If you were to, as a priest, take the sacrifices directly from the people, like that's idolatrous worship right there, right? You're putting yourself in the place of God. And this is exactly what Hophni and Phinehas did in, I believe it's 1 Samuel 2. The sons of Eli, the corrupt sons of Eli, who wanted the sacrifices before they were actually offered to God, right? And they're bypassing that triangle, saying this is a direct obligation to me. So to round all that out, when the minister today charges for something, instead of engaging in this co-labor